Hello team, welcome to session number 2, Software Development Life Cycle. Team, in our previous session, we studied the details about software and type of softwares. The conclusion out of our last session was a simple statement that software is basically a set of electronic instruction that a computer hardware can execute. Now, the important aspect is development of a software, and managing this entire activity as such is a very important and critical activity that happens in the lifetime of a software. And basically there are n number of people, processes and technical aspect involved in such a activity. Basically, at a very general sense, software development life cycle or SDLC is this activity or process that is used by software industry across the world to develop, design and test quality softwares. So every software that is developed has to undergo this format of development and has to follow the processes defined in this activity. What are these processes and how they are followed is the basic agenda for this session. Let's get started. Team, going forward, let us assume we all are part of a software development organization which is engaged in development and testing of custom softwares for its clients. And following is the important point to be noted. We have a small organization named XYZ, and following are various teams that are working in this organization. The management team, the project management team, set of business analysts that are working with us, software developers and software testers. Now team, please note we have an entire set of team working with us. We have close to 5 small teams that will be part of our live project, which I'll shortly explain you all about. Now team, we all have to work together in collaboration to develop a software. Going forward, we all will be part of this team which will develop and design a software. Team, we have been approached by a prospective client called T-Cars Limited, which is manufacturer of high-end industrial and consumer cars and has offices in 5 different countries across the globe and having employee strength of close to 50,000. Now, this company has got the following structure. This company there is the management team, the administrative team, the human resource team, and a finance team working along with the production team. Now, all of these teams work in close collaboration to develop the product for this company. Now the problem in this organization is the structure of this organization is basically paper oriented. They follow the pattern of recording all their manufacturing details along with the employee details on a piece of paper and file the same. Now, this results into operational inefficiency. Basically, the production department workers have to work on daily basis and have to transfer their daily working hours to the finance department through a piece of paper. And then at the end of the month, the finance team has to process their salaries. This is a very tedious and monotonous job too. On the other hand, if the company needs new people to work on the production floor, the production team has to communicate with the HR team and tell them their requirements. Accordingly, the HR team conducts the recruitment drive. Now, all this happens through manual processes and is very tedious. Due to the above stated problems, our client T Cars is facing issues to manage their workloads. At times, there is miscommunication between two departments and that leads to overall inefficiency in this organization. T-Cars Limited has approached us and has asked us to propose a solution that can help them eliminate these inefficiencies. And our approach in this case is to help them by acting as a consultant and delivering a software that will help them eliminate the organizational inefficiencies. Team, before we move ahead, I would like you all to understand the objective behind introducing the case study, trying to understand the typical business model of our client along with the team structure from client side as well as the vendor side, that is the team structure of our company, which consists of various teams like the business analyst team, development and software testing team. The objective was to give you a practical insight and understand the software development process from the practical perspective. This will act as a foundation building block for our testing topics that we are shortly going to get started with. Right now, we have the problem statement in hand that the client is facing. Let's see how a software will typically get developed. What will be the various phases, various documents and code that will be developed, along with the teams and people involved in this entire process. Team, I have a spreadsheet that will explain us the various SDLC phases, objective of each of the phase, along with the input that is required in that phase, which will be processed in order to generate a document or any other relevant output in format of a code or a database. And we will also see various teams of people involved in a typical SDLC phase. The first phase in SDLC is the project initiation phase. Our client has already been through this phase because the client side team has already identified the organizational inefficiency. Most of the people in various organizations already agree that there are various issues in their working format. Now, this is the basic objective of this phase, to outline that various inefficiencies exist in the organization and the same has to be eliminated for betterment of the organization. The other objective of this phase is also to identify the high level estimate of the cost required in order to develop a software or solution that will help them eliminate the inefficiency. They are also going to allocate a vendor, identify a vendor. They have already identified our company as a vendor which will help them to develop this software, and they also seek the necessary approvals needed to get the funding done for this project. Now, the typical input for this phase is the problem statement that details out various issues in the working of the various departments of this company. All right, so this is a problem statement which we have at the end of this phase. Like out of all these objectives from the various meetings that various team members in the client team must have like conducted, there are various documents that get generated. There is a project initiation agenda that gets generated, a business case document which explains out that if software or a solution is implemented, like in actuality, the organizational inefficiency will get eliminated and profitability will be achieved. This document is generally created by the stakeholders from client side in order to explain the value this product or solution will really generate. This document is generally shared to the management team in order to convince them for the funding and the time required to develop the software. Feasibility study: is it like actually possible to implement such kind of system which will help to coordinate between two departments of an organization? This document is generally created with the help from the vendor that is appointment for this activity. Here the objective is to just check whether implementation of such system is possible or not. From the vendor side, that is from our team side, the business analyst and the management team is like once the client side decides that what is the estimate for this project. Suppose they say that we need a software to be developed in say $5,000. So in that case, our team is supposed to create a proposal document which will give them a brief outline, which will propose the client that this will be the various part of the systems that will be developed. We also have to give a detailed cost estimate that that will like give us the detail outline to the client that hey, there are like 6 to 7 different components involved in the entire system, and each of this component will take this much price for development and this much price for testing. So this gives them a complete insight and helps them to convince their management for monetary aspects. Statement of work is another document that is generally created when two parties enter into a contract. Basically here our management team will enter into a contract with the management team of the client side, and then the work will get started. These are basically the legal documents that are created as a part of a project. There is also a project approval document that comes from the client side, which gives the approval for the project, the scope of the project, what all things are in scope of the project, what are not in scope of this project. For example, the scope of the software to be developed is to help two teams, two departments of the organization have a better coordination, but the actual coordination process, movement of people and all that things will be taken care by the client side. That will actually be something that will be happening at the client side. Software has got nothing to do. Software will just give the interface. So these all things should be mentioned in a document which is a scope of the project document. So we also see that while generating all these documents and creating this input files, there are various people involved. There are the end users who are the users of this software, then the management side from the client team. At the vendor side, we have business analyst people who always try to see the monetary aspect about this project. They also see the various requirements put forward by the client, and they try to analyze it. Then there is the management team from our side who will approve the project. All right. Once the approvals are done from both the side, from the client as well as the vendor side, and we are allowed to go ahead with this project, we enter into the next important phase, and that phase is called as the requirement gathering phase. Now, the objective here is to define the requirement of the end user, what exactly is needed by the end user. They also try to define what kind of application is needed. Whether it is a It's a typical client-server based application. It's a client-server application, or it is a standalone application, that is a Windows-based installable application. They also try to define whether it has to be a web-based app or it has to be some other technology. So all these things have come up in the requirement gathering phase, and the typical input for the requirement gathering phase is the scope of the project document that is created. So the people who are involved in the requirement gathering, they pick up the scope of the project document that is created earlier here, and they pass on that scope document as an input, and along with the high level along with the scope document, the high level requirements are taken and they are processed, and finally what gets created is called as the business requirement document and the functional requirement document. Here the objective of creating a business requirement document is to typically draft the business rules that will be part of the system. Functional requirement typically states that how this software is supposed to function from the end user's perspective, and use cases are also created in order to draft the various functionality that will be available in the software. So the people who are involved at this stage are largely the end users, basically the business users, who just give the high level requirements. They just tell that we want a system which will help them to track down the progress of various department and various other things in this way. So once this requirement are given, the business analyst team is supposed to pick up those requirements, draft them into something called as the business requirement document and the use case document, and finally when these documents are created, we call that this particular phase of requirement gathering is completed from the project development perspective. All right, yeah. And once this is done, typically the team moves over to the third important phase, that is the design phase for the project, and here the architecture of the system is defined. Basically this is a very important phase. The use case document that is generated in the earlier phase of requirement gathering, and the other two documents collectively called as the software requirement specification documents. These documents act as an input for the design phase, and then once they are processed, something called as the entity relationship diagram basically comes up. Entity relationship diagram and the class diagram comes up. Now basically what this diagrams are and how do they look like is not what we are going to discuss in this class. However, please bear in mind that these are the documents which are important from the architectural perspective of a project or the system. Now these documents help the developers understand that how the system should be developed, and basically architect is a person or group of people who are responsible to create these documents, and business analysts are supposed to just explain the architects that what exactly is the business requirement or the functional requirement of this project, and then the architects pick up those requirements from them and finally draft something called as the architectural documentation for this project. All right. So once this is done, the design for the system is ready, and the same can be forwarded to the next level, that is called as development level. Here is where the piece of code that is written, as explained to you in the earlier lectures, softwares are nothing but a piece of code. However, when a complex system is generally prepared, there are a number of things that are done. Like it's not as simple as just picking up certain lines of code and just executing them. There has to be a meticulous planning and strong system that should come up, because when you have to develop an software at an enterprise level, there is a lot of thing in the background that has to happen, and that's the reason why the requirement gathering and design phases have their due importance in the entire software development life cycle. And when we come to the development, the ER diagram and other architecture documents that are created by the architects in the design phase act as an input for the development. And here the basic objective is to code and design the system as per the requirements. Here they are supposed to write down the code for the GUI of the application, or else the database for the application, design the end user forms, the screens. The screens typically include those screens which the end user will use to interact with the system. So these all things are done in the development phase, and the final thing which comes up as an output for this phase is basically a clean database that is created, the code that is created, and finally a working product that the user can operate and make use of it for making certain business transactions. All right, now who is basically involved at this stage? DBAs. DBAs are the database administrators. Database administrators, the developers, all right, who are supposed to developers are supposed to write down the code. Probably, if you all know, there is something called as the Java or .NET. Typically any technology can be picked up by the architecture team, and then the respective developers are supposed to write down the code in the respective language, right? Teams see the beauty of all these things, see the way things are coming up, see the way people are getting involved in this entire system, and we are also trying to understand the various terminologies that are used. If someone uses an terminology like ER diagram or class diagram, as a tester, we are aware that what they are typically trying to speak. Even if we don't know the details from the architectural perspective, still we can be part of the discussion that will be carried out as a part of the software development process, and we would be able to interpret and understand the various terminologies used across this product. All right. Now, once this is done, the typical development stage comes to an end, and we move ahead to the most important thing, and the thing which is of primary importance for us, because that's the primary objective of this course, and that is nothing but the software testing that will be conducted on this product, for which the coding is completed by the development team, and they have handed over the product and asked the testing team to test the product. The typical objective of the testing phase here in SDLC is to check if the system works as per the requirements defined by the end user, and all the functional aspects are taken care of, by the development team. Basically, the input is the database or the code and the product that is created, the entire interface that is available for the testers to test. Along with the product, probably some architectural documents can also be forwarded to the testing team, and that is required because they need to understand that what are the actual requirements, because it may happen that the code might be written in a wrong manner. However, the business requirement document is the original source of requirement, and it has to outline the original requirements. There has to be basically the fair idea about how the requirement has to function. Whatever flow has to be covered in the application is all given in the business requirement document. So based upon these two things, particularly the business requirement document, the testing team will come up with something called as the test plan and test cases. We'll shortly come to detailed explanation about what a test plan is and what a test case is. For the time being, you all can imagine that test cases are nothing but flows that are used by the testers to check if the application
is working as per the requirement given by the end users. So once this test cases are executed, the pass-fail results and other interpretations are taken out of it, and the reporting for the application takes place. It's basically a short decision whether the application is as per the requirement or not. So that's the basic outcome which comes when the testing phase is completed, and the people who are involved in this side is from the vendor side we have the business analyst and the testing team, our team who is responsible to execute these test cases. Business analysts play a role to at times explain the business requirement document to the testers if they are not able to understand it. At the client side, the end users are also involved in it. Once our testing team is done with the internal testing, the testing is generally forwarded to the end user to check and verify if it's as per the requirements stated by them. Once all these things are done, we can fairly say that the testing phase of the application comes to an end, and then finally the handover for that application starts, and the vendor is supposed to deploy and start maintaining the application, make it available to the end user who then start using the application. So basically the people involved here are the server administrators who are supposed to put the code that is tested here in the earlier phase on the servers of the client, and then the end users can start using it. The typical input is developed software, or rather we can say the tested software, developed software plus the tested software in the earlier phases, alright, and a rather so-called bug-free software. The output would be a live working product deployed in the client environment, right? So team, that's the complete picture about various stages the product travels through in the SDLC phases, and at a high level we can precisely say that these are the typical 6 stages in the SDLC: the project initiation phase, requirement gathering phase, the design phase, development phase, testing, and then the last one, that is deployment and maintenance phase. So by this we understand what an SDLC is. I'll shortly introduce you all to the live project which we have, and we'll continue ahead with our course. Thanks for now.